Every Halloween, adults and children take on the guise of monster and ghouls. They range from scary to ridiculous. Well, today I'll be giving you a little history on one of our most beloved icons in Halloween culture. I'm Kasai McCoy, and on behalf of all of us, welcome to Around the World. Today I'm joined by our lovely guests, Abby and James. So, when it comes to Halloween, what are some classic Halloween icons that you think of?
Icons? Well, there's pumpkins, skeletons, ghosts, werewolves, and vampires.
I think in Halloween culture, one of the most prominent icons is the witch. I mean, there are witches from Hocus Pocus, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, even the Wizard of Oz.
That's a very good point. When you think of a witch, what do you think of?
Well, there's the pointed hat, black cat, a broom, perhaps a cauldron.
Yes, I think a very specific image pops into your mind, and we all share it. But where did that image come from? Why do all of us know this very specific picture of what a witch is, and yet none of us really know the history? What if I told you it all started with beer?
Beer? There's no way.
So to begin, let's start back in 500 AD, when everybody was living in really tiny villages, and unfortunately, waterborne illnesses were rampant. Fortunately, at the same time, monks had started producing a lot of ale, and so it became really common for people to just drink that instead of water. Now I know what some of you are thinking,
That sounds like a time period I like to live in.
but as a reminder, Abby, you literally couldn't drink the water. You'd probably die. That's right, die. Anywho, so one of the major things that monks did was help travelers and the poor. They would give them a place to stay, but they would also feed them, give them something to eat, something to drink. So, with the rise of Christianity, there's ale all over the place. Really common, not only because of the monks, but also because it was cheap, and it was the most robust thing to give someone. Meanwhile, because ale did have all of these nutrients and the added benefit of keeping people away from the water, home brewing became this really awesome option for a housewife because, ale is food and the ladies take care of the food, so it was just in their jurisdiction. Now, in medieval England, once they started to establish trade with the rest of Europe, you got some hops and everything changed. That's because hops brought aroma. They brought flavor. They brought a delightful bitterness and was actually way closer to what we know of as a beer today. Not only that, but hops are a natural preservative, and so they kind of created this fortuitous situation for the housewives that got really good at brewing. Unfortunately, ale never really tasted great. I mean, it got the job done, but beer was like the new hotness. So all of these lady brewers, otherwise known as brewsters, found themselves with a kind of lucrative hobby that just fell into their lap. Now, you might find the brewster at home with her cats, with a bubbling cauldron, and something that looks suspiciously like a broom above her door, leaving the house with some beer and a very tall tifter on her head.
Wait a second. What is a tifter?
Well, a tifter is a British slang for a hat.
You're right, Abby. If this image is starting to sound a little familiar to you guys, it should. So, let's start to pick apart all the pieces. Now, to be a brewster, you have to have cats around, because one of the major components of beer is malted cereal. And you know who else really loves malted cereal?
Rodents.
That's right, guys. So a lot of women that were working with these food products on a daily basis for a variety of reasons, they would make sure that they were feeding some cats around the neighborhood. Make them feel at home, so maybe they'll kill off some vermin. Next up, I think, would be the broom. Because if you're going to be a dank brewster, you have to have your owl steak.
Owl steak?
Yes, I know. An owl steak was basically this really long branch that you would add all these weird twigs to, and on the end of it, so it would basically look like a broom. And by law, if you were producing ale in your home and then selling it somewhere, you had to display this broom on your home, and it normally was above the door. As a reminder, women at this time were not allowed to have a business, so you had to make sure that you were married so you could be like, I'm not doing it, he's doing it. Next, there's the cauldron, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. Because if you're going to be producing a ton of beer or ale, you would probably do it in a cauldron, right?
Yeah, I think you would make it all in a big old pot and just put it all in.
Yeah, and I can picture it now. It's going to be bubbling and all the elements are going to be in there, right?
Yeah, and eventually it's going to create this really nice thick froth. that you see in a lot of things like cartoons, television shows, and whatnot because of the yeast. And finally, we have the hat, or as I mentioned earlier, the tifter. Literally, everybody had a titfer, but Brewsters, because they're not necessarily supposed to have their own business. One of the ways that they would make sure that somebody would find them and be able to buy ale was to wear a very tall titfer. And now, you're probably going to ask the big question. If this was such a normal thing for a housewife to be doing, to be making beer, for their family to drink, why eventually was it so demonized? Why were these women, who were good at brewing beer, eventually called witches?
Yeah, that is kind of strange.
All right. Well, here's what we know for sure. So, remember how I was saying earlier that hops made it so that ale suddenly tasted and smelled really, really good?
Yeah.
Well, it kind of went from being this small thing that people just did to becoming a really lucrative business, and men really wanted to get into that. They did not want housewives to be making their own money doing this thing. They wanted to establish their own brewing guild, and what happened is, women aren't allowed legally to be in guilds. They're not even supposed to have their own businesses. So suddenly, men are the only official trusted brewers from a business standpoint. But it simply wasn't enough to establish themselves as the legal brewster option. Because, let's be real, women were so good at it. They had been doing it for years, and men were mere children in comparison to the brewing in the brewing world. They were just trying to learn how to brew good beer right. So the only thing that they could really do to crush them for good was calling to question the credibility of the local roosters. For example, a normal person in medieval times has no idea how you turn water into alcohol, right?
Oh, I think I see where you're going with this.
Well, I hope so, James. Turning water into alcohol is like magic, and it's totally fine for a monk to be able to do it, because they figured it out through divinity. But a woman at home who knows how to turn water into alcohol, it's probably the devil. Men of the Brewing Guild started to spread some nasty rumors.
Oh, I get it. Kind of like, I hear she cheats her customers. Or something like, the rat didn't sneak in. She keeps them as pets. Rat people, am I right? Our home is filthy.
You know why her tifter is so big? She thinks she's better than the rest of us.
So the local brewsters were slowly ostracized for their craft and given a really bad name in society, which is just so sad because they really were good, and it was just their way of making money. Now, as for what's been speculated, this whole brewing beer war that happened between men and women, it also correlated with the extreme witch hunts happening in England at the same time. So some people have said that perhaps monks were the ones who said, let's make them scapegoats. They're eating into our profits. The authorities have created a situation where, we're supposed to be above board on all of this. We have guilds and we need to get rid of them. Also, we're given this skill by God, and they obviously weren't. So we're going to call them witches.
I find it a little sad knowing that these women were involved in this production and creation of beer, and nobody really knows about them, and they would have been demonized for it, but just been really good at it and wanted to have a business of their own.
Well, we can take a little solace in knowing that to this day, children and adults still every year dress up as the Brewster witches that they tried to crush. And that's it for today, guys. That's our show. I'd like to thank my two lovely guests, Abby and James, for coming along and joining me. And I want to tell our viewers to stay tuned for the next episode of Around the World. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.